in the air.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Vikings Spin. I'm your host, Jason, and we're going to talk about the Vikings' upcoming matchup against the Oakland Raiders. Coming up here on Sunday, the Vikings and Raiders are both 1-1. Both teams opened up with an opening day victory, and then both teams lost in week 2, so they're both at 1-1 for the records. We're going to take a look at the injury reports for this game before we get started on the Vikings outlook. For the Vikings, they have Mackenzie Alexander out with an elbow injury, and then questionable Mike Hughes, Anthony Barr, Ben Gedeon, and Pat Elflein. Although Mike Zimmer did say that Anthony Barr would play in this game, he felt. So take that how you will. If not, Eric Wilson would be ready to fill in either for Barr or Gedeon, depending on who plays. The doctors hadn't quite cleared Hughes yet, even though he practiced in full all week. So we'll have to see how that plays out. For the Raiders, they do have injuries on the offensive line. Starting right guard Gabe Jackson is out. So he's not going to play in this game. And then their starting kick returner / punt returner and depth wide receiver Dwayne Harris is out. They have several guys who are questionable for the game, including right tackle Trent Brown, who's probably about 50-50 to play in this game, according to what I'm reading in Raiders news. They also have starting linebacker Vontaze Burfict questionable. Lamar Joyner, their starting safety, is questionable as well. And then also a couple of defensive tackles. Corey Legit, who's in their defensive tackle rotation at 3-tech, and their rotational nose tackle, P.J. Hall, is also listed as questionable. So there you have the injury reports. In this game, the Vikings are obviously, looking to bounce back. They started off red hot against Atlanta. Every aspect of the team was great. In the first game, the running game, the passing game, the defense, special teams. And then they got off to a really slow start last week at Lambeau. Defense gave up 21 straight, and got themselves in a hole. But then they battled back. They didn't allow any more points. They were able to scrap and manage to get 16 points, close it to 21-16, couldn't pull it out in the end. So we're looking for some bounce back performances, better starts this week by the defense, better finishes this week by Cousins, and just a cleaner overall game. There's a lot of penalties. Obviously, there were some bad calls last week, but still overall too sloppy with too many penalties that they have to clean up. They'll be at home this week, so I do expect them to bounce back, play better, get those penalties cleaned up. But let's take a look at the matchups and keys to a Vikings victory here, what they could be looking to do. When you look at offensively, the Vikings in this game, the Raiders' defensive line is probably the weakest defensive line that they've played to date. They don't have much of a pass rush on the outside at the defensive end spot. And then in the middle of the defense, they have a couple of finesse defensive tackles. So it's not really a major, Williams Wall type of nose tackles that we're talking about. So I think the Vikings should be able to run the ball effectively. Now the Raiders at the second level, linebackers are a little bit bigger and slower, so that that gives them a little bit of girth behind the light defensive tackles. But if you can get cooked at the second level, and I think the Vikings offensive line should be able to do that against the Raiders D-line, And that's where Cook can make these bigger linebackers like Burfict and guys like that miss out in the open field. So they should be able to run the ball effectively. Probably the best way to get Cousins back on track, I would try to get him some quick, easy, early completions in the game. Just get that early on, get his confidence back, and then once you've established a run, you can hit those guys with the deep ball later on off of play action. You should be able to do that because the Raiders do give up the big play quite a bit in their secondary, so that's where they're vulnerable. Diggs and Thielen should be able to take advantage of those matchups. Against guys like Gary Conley, Trayvon Mullen. I think even Chad Beebe can get loose there in the slot as well. The Raiders play a defense that doesn't pay as much attention to the tight end, so I think this could be a week now. Week 3, finally the tight ends get involved a little bit more in the passing game. Talking about Kyle Rudolph and Irv Smith Jr. So I'm looking for that. Defensively, the Raiders' defensive line, normally inside when they would have had Gabe Jackson, he's a really big guy. Trent Brown's a really big guy. They're a gap scheme running. I would use speed if I were the Vikings in the pass rush to get around these bigger offensive linemen that the Raiders present. They don't have really much at wide receiver, so they really have to depend on their running game. The Vikings crowd should be loud in this, which would be an advantage because the Raiders like to run a lot of checks at the line of scrimmage. So, Carr likes to survey the defense, make his checks. The Vikings crowd should be able to make life difficult for him there. But the Vikings' primary focus has to be rookie running back Josh Jacobs, who the Raiders took in the first round of the draft. He's definitely the best player, I think, the best skilled player on their offense. Because at receiver, they've got Tyrell Williams, who's not a true number 1 wide receiver. The number 2 is Ryan Grant, who might be the worst starting receiver in the league as far as the number 2 guy. Hunter Renfrow is their slot receiver. He's a rookie, a lot like Chad Beebe's skill set. We'll see if Hughes plays in this game. I would expect Hughes to see a lot of action against him. Would also take a look at the Vikings defense when it comes to defending the tight end. Will that be one of the linebackers or will it be one of the safeties? If it's one of the safeties, I think Anthony Harris can handle Waller no problem. Waller does have 13 catches in 2 games, but he's not exactly a world beater at tight end. He's kind of struggles a little bit in shiftiness. So he's not, this is not George Kittle, so to speak. So I think the key would be maybe bring Harrison Smith down in the box to try to stop that running game with Josh Jacobs. Obviously, the injuries on the Raiders' offensive line will help to slow down the running game, hopefully. The Vikings should probably just play their keys, play their gaps. They have a really nice matchup if they can get them in 3rd and long with Everson Griffin against Colton Miller. Colton Miller really struggles at left tackle. And Derek Carr is not exactly, a guy that's going to get outside the pocket and make things happen. So I think a similar rush plan to what they used against Matt Ryan. They can sort of just pin their ears back if it's 3rd and long on Derek Carr. Doesn't have much at receiver. Doesn't have a reliable pass protecting offensive line. So the Vikings should be able to get a lot of pressure in this game, which should help out. On special teams, there's like we noted, Dwayne Harris is out for the Raiders, and he's the usual kick returner and punt returner. So the guy that they have backing him up, Jalen Richard, who's a backup running back, he has problems with fumbles. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on special teams if they can force a fumble. If they can win the turnover battle in this game, it would be huge. A quick start and the turnover could turn this game into a Vikings blowout. You just don't want to get into one of those games where it's like the Bills game last year where you overlook a bad opponent at home. I think coming off a heartbreaking loss at Lambeau, I don't think the Vikings are going to be overlooking anything. I think they're going to be hungry for a win, knowing they need to get one here. So that's what I expect. It's a veteran team. I have all the confidence in the world that Cousins will bounce back. You saw last year after the Buffalo game, he came back strong and was able to string together some really nice performances after that against the Rams. Went into Philadelphia and won that game last year, and then went on to beat the Jets and Cardinals and played well from that point out. So if the Vikings can do that, just bounce back this week, get Cousins comfortable again, I think they'll be right back to where they want to be in terms of this season's outlook. So that's the way I see it playing out. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. Don't forget to encourage others to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and be sure to check out Viking Spin on Facebook and Twitter. I'll be putting out the Vikings Raiders matchup sheet shortly after this. So stay tuned and Skol. Take care.